Suspense. There you go. Well, my name is Emanuele Francioni, and I am the founder of Web3 Ventures. And tonight I am going to, well, first of all, I am very happy that I made it tonight, considering that there was a little bit of a debate with my parole officer, but fortunately I made it out. Does this thing still work? It does, right? It kind of follows me around. Anyway, so when I actually thought about, I'm going to speak about blockchain in business, I was a little afraid, to be completely honest, because it's not really a very easy thing to talk about, considering that it's really not that fun. How many of you, for example, know about cryptocurrencies and ICOs? Well, it's a rhetoric question. Don't open up. Everybody, pretty much. So, I think that if I had to count, for example, all the different things, all the different keywords that go around when we are speaking about blockchain, and as a matter of fact, if you start on Google and you start to type blockchain, then normally the suggestions always go on these words, trading, send and receive payments, so microtransactions, smart contracts, and cloud storage, so decentralized cloud storage, these kind of things, loyalty programs, tokens. They all use cryptocurrencies. The cryptocurrency became pretty much synonym somehow of blockchain. There are, I believe, 35 meetups here in the Netherlands that are about cryptocurrencies, that are about the currency, that are about the coin, about the economic incentive that is linked to the blockchain, and probably only 8, and I think they are, 8, and they are probably decreasing in number as we speak right now, that are speaking about the technology. And the reason for that is that it is much more fun to speak about the coins, all these things going up, going down, getting millionaires overnight, And it's really not that fun to speak about or to try and explain applications that draw from game theory, from decentralized systems, from extreme parallelism, from Byzantine fault tolerance, and all that. It's very challenging. However, tonight, I am going to speak about this particular aspect. I am going to speak about blockchain devoid of cryptocurrencies. And why? Because for what concerns businesses, as we will see, the financial incentive of running nodes is really not as compelling as it is for permissionless public chains. So let's start from the consensus mechanism, okay? Like I said, we will speak about permissionless versus permission. So that guy there, well, normally when somebody is starting to speak about Byzantine fault tolerance, then they start with the Byzantine general problem. Now, I am a big fan of the show Bursuchfrau. It is a reality show for those of you who do not know. In the Netherlands, the translation is pretty much like farmer seeking wife. And the reason why I am a big fan of that is because the very first time that I went out with my girlfriend, I actually wanted to get back to her apartment. And I didn't really have an excuse to get back there. And she said, okay, so what should we do right now? I said, well, we should probably get to your apartment. But why? Because I need to watch Bursuchfrau. And she said, really? I said, yeah, I'm a big fan of that show. That was 8 years ago. I'm still with her. I really can't believe that she actually fell from it. Anyways, so instead of speaking about generals, we are going to speak about farmers. So imagine that there is this farmer. This farmer that is a BFT farmer. So this farmer, every time that he goes to the market in the morning, he sets up the price for the Burenkol, so kale. And in this particular case, he says, for example, that 1 kilogram of kale costs 50 cents. And he has also kiosk managers, and these kiosk managers they are the retail seller of this kale at the market. Now, the problem is that there is a lot of noise in the market. So when the farmer shouted before leaving, hey, today the kilo of kale is 50 cents, then they cannot really be sure that they heard it right, okay? So they need to talk to each other in order to achieve a certain particular consensus on what is going to be the price for that day. Now, let's imagine that there is a Byzantine kiosk manager there, meaning a trader, somebody that works for another farmer. So what he's going to do is he's going to actively try and prevent all the different kiosk managers to achieve consensus. How does he do that? Well, he will send conflicting messages. Now, the only way until 1999 that we had in order to solve this problem, the Byzantine problem, was for each single node of the network to talk with everybody else. And then at some point, for example, in this case, two of these kiosk managers, they would talk and they would say, what did the farmer say? Oh, I think it was 50 cents. Ah, yeah, 50 cents. And then the third one would say, no, it's 30 cents, right? But then the consensus would be achieved because the majority said it's 50 cents. Now, the problem with this algorithm is the fact that it doesn't scale. It is exponentially complex, so that the more nodes you add to this network, the more kiosk managers you add to this network, the more messages need to go around. And obviously, only if you really do need to solve that problem, which I believe before 1999 it was a solution applied only in particular applications like, for example, airplanes or even the CAN bus in the car. So, but unless you had a really mission-critical problem to solve, then you wouldn't use something like that. So this is why the entirety of the world greeted the solution of Satoshi Nakamoto, the great invention of mining, as the masterstroke solution to this problem. Why? Well, Satoshi Nakamoto, with his proof-of-work consensus, he invented mining. What does it mean? It means that each particular kiosk manager, they would try to solve an asymmetric cryptographic challenge, and asymmetric means that it's very, very, very hard a challenge to be solved, but it's incredibly simple to check if the solution is effectively the right one. So they would start to solve this challenge. One of them at some point would solve it in a non-deterministic way. And the only thing that he had to do, the only message that he had to propagate was the solution, the challenge, and 50 cents per kilo of kale. This was brilliant. Of course, this applies to both, or could apply rather, to both a permissionless open network as much as a permissioned private network. Now, the fact that anybody could join this network, and anybody that in fact had an interest in joining the network did, is because at the end of the process, when the solution, when this challenge was solved, then all these people would be rewarded with coins. There would be an embedded financial incentive in order to process transactions and in order to secure the network. This was absolutely one of the most brilliant things ever, apart from the fact that Bitcoin got to $12,000 today, which is also pretty cool. Anyways. Now, if we are thinking about traditional businesses here and applications that traditional businesses need to guarantee in terms of properties, you would have, well, probably a distributed network. Then the system, the network, should guarantee the immutability of transactions. And then here things get a little hairy, because you would also need to guarantee performance. You would need to guarantee privacy. These are things that a traditional business cannot really renounce to. The system must be scalable, hopefully Byzantine fault tolerant, and then this network, this system, would probably also, it would be nice if it could run decentralized process and keep a decentralized state after each step of this process. Smart contracts capabilities. Now, if we look at that, then we can see that mining is really not a practical solution. It's not really good for traditional businesses. Why? Well, first of all, because performance is limited. Anytime that a block is produced, then that is the performance limit of that particular system. Now, one thing that you can do is to decrease the difficulty in order to mine block, but still it doesn't really help. Also because it will create a lot of different problems of branching the chain here and there. But a worse problem is the fact that coins, or the financial incentive for a business, doesn't really mean much. A business, by definition, wants to promote and advance its own business. And therefore, the cost of being capable of retroactively revert transaction chain is really minimal if compared to the benefit of mining new coins. So mining is really not the solution for current traditional companies. So what is? How can we go coinless and still provide the same kind of benefit and fit all the different properties that I just described? Well, one of the solutions, there are many, but one of the solutions is called practical Byzantine fault tolerant systems. Now, practical Byzantine fault tolerant systems, they do not really use coins. They achieve decentralization with different kind of mechanism. For example, the nodes that join the network, they are not all equals. They assume a certain role. Each single node has got a state by itself that they use in order to keep the coherence and the consistency of the transactions. And most important, they need also to be efficient in communicating with each other. Also, practical Byzantine fault-tolerant systems, they take a holistic approach to decentralization and to the blockchain that goes from a client submitting a transaction up to the blocks that are in fact ordered and produced. There are many different systems that use PBFT. There is Hyperledger, for example. And here I'm going to explain briefly how one of the most famous systems based on Hyperledger, which is Hyperledger Fabric, works. There are others that use a hybrid approach, like, for example, Ripple or Stellar. And they use a hybrid approach because practically it is practical Byzantine fault tolerant, but also they use coins, because why not? So in this particular system, which is drawn from Fabric, from Hyperledger Fabric, how does it work? So first, a client proposes a certain particular transaction. It speaks with different kind of roles in the network. These roles are the endorser, the orderer, and then the normal peers. Fabric also has smart contract embedded. So let's say, for example, that the client wants to trigger a function call on a smart contract. What it does, it proposes it to a certain endorser and says, please execute this transaction. So it sends the contract name or the function name together with the input parameters. And then the first endorser, E0 in this particular case, executes this transaction, says yes, it signs it, and then it sends it back to the client. The transaction is valid, and it sends also an anchor that is pretty much the version number that identifies a certain particular ledger state. The interesting thing about Hyperledger Fabric is the fact that they can also customize or enforce customized policies of endorsement. In this particular case, for example, before being accepted, a certain particular transaction needs to be endorsed by 3 different nodes, E0, E1, and E2. So after the client gets back the sign from E0, then it submits the same anchor and the same transaction signed by E0 to the other 2 endorsers. The endorsers endorse it. And then finally, the client sends it to the ordering service. So the order, which is a sub-network inside of these things. The order has got a pretty critical function here because it gets all the different transaction lists from a lot of different clients. So it needs to order them in such a way that it makes sense. Because, for example, if I am giving this to Philip right now, and then I receive this from Yaya, then this doesn't work. I first need to receive it from Yaya in order to give it to Philip. So the orderer does exactly that. Makes sure that all the different transactions are run coherently, or those that are in fact rejected, then they are. The interesting part about Hyperledger Fabric is also another point. The fact that it can allow privacy. So messages can be partitioned into separate channels in order to ensure privacy. For example, imagine that there are a lot of different automotive companies that they all take part of this Hyperledger network, right? So Fabric network, PBFT network. And they transact with each other and with part sellers. Now, if, for example, Toyota can get parts with a 35% discount, then probably they do not want to propagate this particular information to all the other nodes, because otherwise then, everybody would go there and get the same part. So they would give out an advantage by doing so. So this is why, in this particular case, Toyota and this reseller, or this part reseller, would use the red chain, the red channel, sorry, rather than the white one, which is used by Hyundai, because they suck. I had a Hyundai. So these are the reasons why right now traditional companies are getting, oh, sorry, Hyundai, I forgot that this was kind of live streaming. It was really a nice car. So this is also why all these different traditional companies need or are getting on board on Hyperledger Fabric and many other things. Now, another point that I would like to make is, okay, so everything is nice. We can have a network that has got certain particular properties like privacy, like scalability, like performance, also because this is way more performant in producing a block, in producing blocks, for example. And and all of that. By the way, this is a description of Fabric 1.0. The previous one was 0.6, and it works in a different way. So what can you do with it? Which is the $1 million question when we're speaking about blockchain without coins. Because if there were coins, then you could trade, and this presentation would be completely useless. So one thing that you can do is to monetize access. Let's, for example, imagine that there is a service, an inherent service that is going to provide a lot of value to all the nodes inside of a network. Now all these nodes, to be in the network, need to pay, because this provides value to them. So one of the use cases and the monetization technique for these particular blockchains, and they are all collective-based model. It's very difficult right now to monetize on a blockchain application if you are just an SME. But when you have a collective that needs to trade or needs to do things with each other, needs to exchange value in a trustless way, then there is where the optimal and the sweet spot is met. So in this particular case, for example, monetizing access works very well. This is partly the business model of medical chain. So clinical history, for example, or clinical trials are put at disposal of all the different nodes in the network. And in order for healthcare actors to join the network, well, they need to pay medical chain. Another very interesting use case is certifying provenance. Everledger, I think that they got it right. I think they have a perfect use case for that. They certify the provenance of diamond. What they do, they take a diamond, they create a sort of a thumbprint of a diamond using a lot of different parameters that are specific to these particular diamonds. So the diamonds so identified, they are then linked to an entry in the blockchain so that provenance can be traced. This eliminates a hell of a lot of problem with black market, for example. And not only that, so they did that. And right now, all the different certification houses, they are using this particular system to certify all the different transactions that diamonds have been through. This is just one of the examples. For example, I know that in Italy, we are pretty proud of our wines. You know, there are DOC wine, which stands for Denominazione Origine Controllata. And the certification uses or attempts to create a similar certification are right now in place, and people are or companies are experimenting with also with the blockchain by using, for example, the cork, the bottle, the grape, and all that. So certifying provenance is also another very interesting use case. Timestamping. Say, for example, that I did a song, and then somebody else is playing this song somewhere else and is claiming that they own this song. More about that later. If I am timestamping, or if I am creating a timestamping certificate that can prove that I did that before the others, then I am the owner of that particular intellectual properties. There is a platform called Metrognomo. It doesn't really use practical Byzantine fault tolerance. It uses interwoven whatever. Don't really remember the acronym right now. Anyways, Metrognomo. And they do exactly that. It is something that is used for a lot of different things, to certify that something has been done before the others. It's a very powerful concept. Another thing that can be monetized. Right now, Metrognomo, if I'm not mistaken, is a project of the alderman of London. His name is Michael Mainelli. Hi, Michael. Digital identity management is another big one. And people say that it is going to be the business case that is going to, create revenues for billions. Digital identity management is huge. There are cryptocurrency-based applications that try to solve that problem. For example, Civic is one of the most famous. But there are also coin-less approach, for example, by Security Key Technology. They are a Canadian company, and they are using a consortium of banks to connect people to some online services, making sure that these people can use what they are used to, like, for example, their banking credentials. There are many others. Land titling. This is live in Georgia as we speak. Thanks, Yaya, for this example. But my personal favorite is when blockchain can be integrated with IoT. One of my favorite company is Moye Coffee. What they do, they have a machine that reuses AI and computer vision so to assess the quality of the coffee cherry that are brought by the producers of coffee. And this system is used to disintermediate the coffee industry, which right now defraud these producers of at least 20% of their profit, if not more. Prices of coffee in the Western civilization are rising, and the producer gets less. Doesn't really make much sense. This is why Moye Coffee produced these machines, and they are already up and running. I really would suggest everybody of you to have a look and to support the project, because it's really, really nice. So thank you very much. I hope that I didn't really bore you that much without all the cryptocurrency. And buy Omise Go, please.
Emanuel. Is there anyone who would like to have advice on what cars to buy, or any questions related to the blockchain examples? Everything was clear? No questions at all?
Curious about the diamond thumb printing. Is there anything more you can tell about it?
No. I mean, I know roughly how it works. What they do, I think that they get the carrot, they get the light, they do a lot of different assessment on the diamond, and then they create an ID, just an identification for that, and then they upload it on the blockchain, and then everybody that can, that speaks diamond, then can probably calculate that ID and see exactly where that diamond has been. But more than this, I don't really know.
Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
What project are you most excited about currently?
It's very difficult for me to not do self-promotion right now, considering that UNL, the Universal Name Locator, is probably one of the most amazing projects you will ever hear. UNL.global, you can go there. Is it? Oh, God. Okay, so question back to you. Do you mean in a cryptocurrency space, or more like in a blockchain, cryptocurrency-less space?
In blockchain.
So in the latter. Moye Coffee. That is the one that I'm the most excited about, because of the fairness of what they are trying to achieve, because they are making money while they are doing it, and because there is a real problem that can be solved right now.
Thank you. Final question.
Just to take the example of provenance, one firm creates a ledger with a certain standard. What happens if another firm creates another ledger with another standard?
That's a very good question. So these are private permission blockchains. And by definition, they are private blockchains. So they are, they enforce a certain particular business model and participation only for nodes that are permissioned to be there. So the coexistence of two different chains is by definition possible because these two chains would compete with each other. So in this particular case for Everledger, they were pretty smart because before creating the product, what they did was to go in all the different certificate houses worldwide and strike a partnership with them. And I'm not completely sure about it, so I don't want to guess, but I do suspect that they also had some exclusivity deal in place. And of course, if for some other diamond provenance provider wants to do the same, then he has to have the customers on board. And in that perspective, I am not really sure how many certification houses are there. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm live. Does this thing track me as well? It does. Okay. This one is a little bit. So, okay. I guess like this. So, yeah, I'm live, right? Okay, hi guys. Well, first up, I want to thank Emanuel because he just already gave some pretty good examples on some of the ways that we've utilized the blockchain, because we are not that much interested, although we do use, of course, the currency side, but the cryptocurrency, but we're more on the blockchain applications itself, and Hyperledger Fabric was one of the ways that you showed, which we also use it. Anyways, blockchain solutions in the music industry. My name is Andy Zondervan. I'm one of the co-founders of Rideshare, and we try, as they say, to revolutionize the music industry, which is a big word. To be honest, our mission is to give artists and all their related business partners all the ways to direct connection, insights. This is not correct, right? Insights and remuneration possibilities for copyright-related contract deals. This is, I'm just going to go on. Oh, it's my slide, I guess, or something. The end game overall is in the music industry to get transparency to be more than just a word in the copyright industry, because today a lot of people keep saying it, but they're not doing it. And our role as Rideshare is not to fix the whole music sector as a whole, but we just want to be the mover and shaker to get things going. And we have some concepts behind that, and we hope to be able to prove that in the long run. We provide music creators the tools to create their own futures in the way that they want it. But before I go into what we do as a company, I first want to sketch to you what the problem actually is in the music sector. For some of you may know this already. For a lot of people, they know parts of what the problem is. I'm just going to try and sketch it out for you just a little bit. So, let's start with the problem, the music industry metadata, because we're talking about data in the music industry. To be honest, just to put it frankly, it's a total mess. The current information chain for creator to fan is so diluted and so unstructured that it's basically unworkable in the digital age that we live in today. So if I show you that chain, from creator to digital service provider, and just keep in mind that could be a Spotify or an Apple or an iTunes or whatever. Let's take a look at that chain. So first of all, I'm just going to explain it to you a little bit. The data provided to the music industry entities by creators, so the people who make the music, so the composers, the text writers, they provide their information regarding a work that they made to artists who use it to create a song, to record companies, to publishers, to copyright industry executives, like the Buma-Stemmers, for instance, in the Netherlands, or ASCAP in the US. They provide all this kind of data to them. This is called the creators' data. After that, all these entities create their data sets in order to filter that through to the DSP, the digital service provider. From there on in, that digital service provider obviously needs that to give the information to their fans. So like, for instance, the title track information, or which artist is working with who, how does the cover look of this track, stuff like that. So this is just a basic chain for one track, from one creator and one artist. This is how it would look in theory. But this is obviously not the case in the real world. Often there's a multitude of creators involved with creating just one single track. For instance, to give you an example, an Eminem track, with the one that he did with Rihanna, I believe, had 64 creators involved. So just to give you an idea, these are two artists who work with 64 different people who created that work which they turn into a track. So imagine the amount of data which goes from there to the data lines that increase exponentially to the digital service provider. Still not a big problem, right? But there's another thing coming on top of that, is that the master rights world, so the people who create the tracks, don't talk that much and are basically in a different universe than the people who create the work, who create not the track itself, not the playable music, but the composition, so to say. That's a whole different, that's the copyright-related industry versus the master rights-related industry. They're two different industries working adjacent from each other, but not working together. Still, to be honest, for a company like, for instance, a Spotify or an Apple, this is still manageable, right? Because you just need big data solutions. And keep in mind, this is still working just from one track. So you have basically 7 data lines, 6 data lines coming in just from this, with all these different information sets from all these different publishers, etc. But still, it's a lot of information for one track, but still, through big data, you can compile this together. So this is not a problem. Now, this is where the first problem occurs. There's a total absence of an overall universal data language. This means that everybody who sends their information, and I mean every record company, from every artist individually, to every publisher, to every CMO, chooses its own way of sending that information. So that basically means there's fractured information all over the place. There's different file formats, several data standards. They're partially clustered. There's no unified data language. So you have all these different data language coming in. And there's different business rules for each of these data sets. So having to create a warehouse system for your big data to be able to work with this, that's a huge challenge upon itself. And keep in mind, I'm still talking about one single track, which has all this different information coming through. Now imagine that there's about 60 million tracks on a service like, for instance, Spotify. So you can imagine the amount of data that is involved. But to be honest, even though this is a huge problem already, this is still just the tip of the iceberg. Because absence of an overall universal data language, still smart people can still solve that problem, get some universal standards in their company anyways, make sure that it works. But the real big kicker comes here. There's a lack of data hygiene. There's poor data hygiene all over. So that means that the music industry metadata we're talking about is often not on time, so you cannot rely on it. It is often incomplete, so you just get partial information. And often, and that's the baddest of them all, it's incorrect. It's wrong. So that means that, going back to this, the digital service providers doesn't only have to receive this information, it also has to, oh, somebody really likes me. Let's see if it's my phone. Let me put this here. No. They also have to provide usage and remuneration information back to all these entities on their business rules. So that's also a lot, which comes back on to the creators through all these different problems that I already sketched before. And that basically means to them that the incorrect information, that there's a lot of unclear statements, there's too much being claimed, or there's not enough being claimed. There's, if you talk about incomplete, there's various file standard formats what I already told you, statements which are not 100% claimed, or for instance, not on time. Some of the statements don't ever become available at all. They're just not being sent. And this provides a bigger problem for the digital service providers themselves, because in the end, there are a lot of consequences on this. There's legal consequences because they're getting sued by artists who say, you haven't paid me, even though some of the information was so incorrect that they couldn't work with it and didn't have an idea on who they have to pay on a certain track, for instance. Financial consequences, they have to pay after the fact, so they have to store a lot of money to be able to pay out once this stuff comes in, sometimes after years. And the business consequences, of course, you have to have a lot of back-end and a lot of administration and a lot of big data warehousing to be able to run a music service. So imagine being a startup with a bright idea on a new streaming idea, and you just want to work together with the music industry, and you have to tackle all this. So maybe your R&D budget is going to be completely swamped and drained by just solving this. And it's not just for the digital service provider where the problem lies, because coming back in that line, for the creators and the artists themselves, they suffer as well, because there's incomplete payment distributions which come back to them. Payments are late, they're confusing, often they don't even know where they're coming from, and sometimes they don't even get paid at all, because there's not a lot of micro payment solutions available. So if you're a small-time artist and you just started out, and you get all this little bit of money from all these services, and they would have to send it through, for instance, a label or through a CMO, often they don't get to the threshold and they're not being paid at all because it's just too expensive to go through the system. The current problems are sustained in the music industry actually because there's a lot of traditional structures in place that don't want to change this. So there's no clear overview or repertoire, just naming a few. There's a huge amount of data to process, which they are not able to anymore. There's a lot of double claims of ownership, so different companies claiming the same ownership part than the other. So in the end, you don't, as a service provider, you don't have any idea, okay, you're asking me 80% and you're asking me 80%, so I have to pay 160% of what my income is. How am I going to do this? So the music data industry itself haven't been able to find solutions in the past, and the solutions are often fragmented and not market-wide. And because there's no overview, the result is that there's no transparency at all. Does this sketch the problem a little bit for you guys? Hope so. So, but of course, talking about a problem is funny, but let's talk about the solution. And for the people who understand blockchain, and I think most of you in the room, if not all, will understand, of course, already, like, hey, blockchain, that's a simple solution to create. Because what do we want in the end? We want, from one side to the other, we want the data, copyright data information to flow both ways, right? So we want direct connection, and we want direct remuneration to be able to be played out. And this is actually how my business card looks. This is just the back end of our logo. This is what we want. Not just we as rideshare, but I think this is what the music industry, music data industry should be able to want. So what do we know? What needs to change? We need to move away from fragmented data sharing. That's a simple one. I already sketched why. And the central solutions have proven to be technically feasible, right? Because there's a lot of these kind of systems in place in all the different industries which work. Single sources of truth are not that hard to create. A single database where you put everything in, technically easy. But there's a problem with the political minefields in the music industry, and why is that? Nobody wants to share. They don't want to share their data because that's their gold. So obviously, there's a disconnection all over the place, and that's why there's up-to-date no IMDb for music. IMDb stands for, of course, the International Movie Database. So you can, as a customer, can go to any movie in the world and see, if you're a pro user, you can see who every actor is, what they've been doing, how they've been involved in the movie, how much it costs to create the movie. Everything which has to do with the movie is basically in one database. And this is a public database. You don't have this for music. Yeah, you have Spotify where you can find all the tracks, but find the information behind the track? No. So this is where blockchain obviously comes in. Decentralized blockchain solutions can use the benefits of the single source of truth benefits without the political pitfalls, because all these companies get to keep their data for themselves. They just have to make verifications to, for instance, a blockchain to say, okay, this is where the true data is coming from. So instead of sending it all over the place and everybody sending it to everybody, they just send it through one single way of working through a blockchain. So obviously, what was already mentioned in the previous presentation, and I've not gone into technical parts that as much as more of the business ideas behind why we were creating what we did. Of course, permissioned ledgers are the way forward for a closed system like the music industry. Because everybody, all the parties involved have access to the network and they know each other and are already trusted, so to say. So the label of, for instance, an artist like Hartwell, you know that we work with the guy, is trusted that he's the label of Hartwell. So you can easily identify that guy, easily say, okay, this is the artist, and you can have validation in place for that. So that's easy to do. So these permissioned ledgers are the way forward for this kind of an industry. The only challenge that there is this is a political challenge, of course. Who can see what and who can do what? And this is where decentralization of trust comes into play. And you just have to identify, as one of these parties, you just have to identify who you give the rights to create information, to see information, to do something with that information, to use the information. So this has become a more easier way of working for them because they get to be the owner of their data, but still they get to share it. And the way that we think we should do this, and this is how we've been trying to solve these problems, is by creating multiple smart contracts needed to create for each of these entities their way of working to a certain blockchain. So the challenge is to create a universal smart contract rule. We've been not trying to do that. There's different companies who are trying to tackle that and who are trying to create a lot of standards, and we monitor, but I'll go into that a little bit later. If you look at the market, we're not saying we're gonna revolutionize the music industry by doing completely different than anybody else. We're not inventing a new world, we're reinventing the existing world of the music industry. And if that means that they start shifting and some of the entities in that get a different role, in my opinion, that's up to them. So if an artist comes to the conclusion, he says, hey, I don't need a publisher anymore, this is something that you often hear when you start talking about these kind of solutions, and they say, oh, we can cut everybody from the chain. I'm not saying that's true. Could be, could not be, but this is the choice that I personally think we should give back to the artists. They have the choice because they have the possibilities to do it the way that they want to do it. So I'm not saying my mission is to cut labels or to cut publishers or whatever. They all have a different function in this system, and maybe their functions will change, but up to today, they all have their different functions. So there's three parts of the market that we extrapolated from each other. The internal market, so this is still the copyright industry, so the copyrights, the master rights market, that's the internal music market. Then the external music market, it's what I consider the digital service providers who buy the music basically from the internal market. Artist websites as well, ad agency, marketing, promotionals, whatever you do, this is the way that you have to receive the product and have to use the product. And of course, then there's the fan on the back end, and you can work with a direct-to-fan concept. This thing is going all over the place. With a direct-to-fan concept. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit where the differences lie with what is needed in these smart contracts. The internal market is more interested in creating identification and authentication concepts which work with smart contracts. And you already mentioned some of the things that you need to do to be able to do this. Identification is obviously, you have to have a unique identifier who says, okay, this is Hartwell, so Hartwell, yes, this is Hartwell. So that if I say 2 months later that I'm Hartwell, then I'm not being trusted. So, because otherwise I would make the millions instead of him, just so he does the work and I get the money on my bank account. That would be nice. But so this is the way that you need to work through a smart contract for this particular section of the market. Obviously, for the external market, they have different needs. They're more interested in distribution of the data, of course also of the track, but that's already, there's a lot of companies who already do that pretty well, and I'm not that interested to place all tracks within a blockchain. I'm more interested in placing the information, all the data needed for that track in a blockchain. And then you can attach that blockchain, of course, to a track and still send it out. So the distribution and also the negotiations which are taking place and the terms that you have in a contract for payouts and everything, you could store that in the blockchain. Because that would make it real easy for a digital service provider once he can unpack it to say, oh, this is the way that they want to be paid. And it can be decentralized all over the place because through digital currency, you can obviously make a subset for 20 million payments just like that. That's easy. Relatively easily technically, of course. Which, because you have to do it centralized now, it's really difficult. But in this way, it's simple. And of course, it creates a lot of possibilities for a fan relationship because you can make direct-to-fan concepts, which are now more difficult. Because if a fan picks up on the blockchain, and you can use it just to say, okay, you can just see this subset of information which is stored in the blockchain, but you can use it directly through all these kind of services, then all of a sudden, you have possibilities for the artist to get in direct contact, to make marketing concepts, to make all kind of promotional concepts or loyalty programs or whatever you think of. And of course, there's a lot of digital currency which you can use with that. So you would need for an ecosystem of smart contracts, you would need this if you want to surface that problem that I just sketched with all these different information lines in the music industry. And this is basically how it would look, just on a global level. Is from the creator to the digital service provider, you would put in one blockchain all these different smart contracts, and you can keep adding to it, of course, because a smart contract is in a really light file. It contains the information and the rules that you need from all these different entities. And you just have one data line going to the service provider who can unpack what he needs and put that in a system and automate that. And then he can work with that, with just receiving the data, and then the remuneration back to the artist. You can do that through digital currencies in that same, in a rule within a smart contract. So that makes it easy as well, relatively easy. And then to come back to, of course, what we stated is one of the first artists that we work with, or the first artist we worked with was Hartwell. And this is what we did with him. We created the set for the master rights with him together, and partially for the copyrights, but we put all copyright remuneration distributed to the publisher. So we didn't have all the entities in place yet, but just some of them. But this was the first case where a major artist was put in a blockchain and was distributed, and the information and remuneration went through the same line. And obviously, we did not do this with all the digital service providers, just small ones. But it was more of a proof of concept. Can it be done? And what happened on the flip side of this, and this is why we worked with Hartwell. I'm going to explain to you this a little bit. Everybody is probably aware of this economical concept of the long tail. It's been beaten to death in the last 10 years. It's being used a lot in presentations in the music sector. Anyway, without really explaining how it completely works, it's about the amount of plays. The more plays you have, the more value you have as an artist, and the more tracks there are in the system, it dilutes the system back to all the way that a track is not being played anymore, so then the value is zero. So the more plays, the more value, the less plays, and the more artists, the less value. So if you look at this, the impact as an artist is obviously the more you go to the left. You have more impact as an artist. And there's a lot of political discussion, related discussion around blockchain initiatives and blockchain startup initiatives in the music sector, because they're all interested, but still, there's not a real, how do you say that, a real oomph hasn't been the case before Hartwell in the blockchain. Because there was a lot of discussion, but most of the current initiatives were related with so to say, smaller artists or artists who had their own small ecosystem, which was really workable, and some of them were really good, but still they didn't make a huge impact because they didn't really hit the music industry on a level where it really hit the revenues. And that's obviously what we did, because Hartwell is one of the biggest artists in the world. So once he starts saying like, okay, hey, as an influencer, he has a huge influence in the music sector. So all of a sudden, everybody started to waking up going like, wait a minute, this is serious. This is not just some small guys in a garage. This is one of the biggest DJs in the world with a huge revenue stream, which has a huge impact on the industry. We're talking about 2 years ago, he was the biggest, the top #1 DJ in the world. his revenues are in the hundreds of the millions. So all of a sudden, when he starts saying, I'm starting with the blockchain by putting my product in blockchain, and I'm not going to go through the traditional models any longer, everybody starts going, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening here? So from that moment on, last year, all of a sudden there was a huge acceleration. Remember that I said we wanted to be mover and shaker? That's exactly what we thought that would happen. That's exactly what happened. All of a sudden, everybody started becoming aware, and there's a lot of initiatives going on. Fortunately, we are not the only one working on solutions, because we as a company trying to create a solution for a worldwide problem as big as the music industry, that's an utopia that I'm not going to be unrealistic about. But there's a lot of solution initiatives currently underway, and these are some of them. Like, for instance, the Open Music Initiative. They're all working on sub-problem solutions, because there's all these problems still involved with creating a blockchain contract or smart contracts in a blockchain. Like, for instance, which was already mentioned before, the time that it takes to create a new blockchain, for instance, depending on which blockchain you use. But the amount of information which can be shared is so big, and the speed with it can be received. There's no blockchain yet who could contain all the data which is needed to be able to do this worldwide. So working on a global solution for all the music, and for especially catalog music, so not the new releases. Because if you create a new track, of course you can create a way to put it in a blockchain. But what about tracks who have been around for 20 years? Different idea, you have to put it in, but who is the one who puts it in? So all these problems are being tackled by all these different entities who are currently working on some of the solutions needed. And what do we see as rideshare? There's a reality check to be said, is that blockchain is not going to be the holy grail on data management. Even though if you put in blockchain and music in Google, there's going to be 1,000 articles saying it is. I don't believe it. I think it's just going to be a partial solution to some of the problems that are in the music industry on the data side. So how do we perceive it as rideshare? We're just monitoring. This is an innovation playground for us. And that means that we monitor, we discuss, we participate, we share, we partner. Do I need this thing? We partner with them to see what's going on. And in the end, it means that we try to take a modular approach. So whenever there's an incremental problem solution, we try to integrate that for the clients that we work with. And we integrate the various blockchain standards which are used, because there's currently, I believe, there's 8 different blockchains currently used for the same problem solution. But that will mean that there will be a standards war in the future. So instead of getting every label and every digital service provider having to deal with that, this is one of the things that we want to deal with in the back end. So I was talking about rideshare as the problem solution. And let me show you a little bit more on who we are. So like I mentioned before, we have no inspiration to become the new standard, because I don't believe there's going to be one standard. There are already 15 standards, and there's going to be a 16, 17, 18 one. But we do want to provide the creators with the tools for their future. So how do we do that? We provide them with a lot of solutions, which are just technical solutions, which makes it easier for them to operate instead of having to worry about which standard they are going to have to use. And we do that by being a consortium of companies. So rideshare is not just a product of me and a couple of people in a room. We actually, 2 years ago, we attracted a lot of very smart companies, blockchain programmers, data handling and insights company, trend and data reporting company, an interface and API programming company, and a smart contract legal service. All different companies with some of them already 40, 50 people in place who are already creating their own thing. But working together as a consortium, we can tackle a lot of these problems. And that is basically what we do as rideshare. And this is what I had to say. Are there questions?
Thanks for a great talk, Andy. Very insightful.
Yeah, not so technical, but more on the practicality. Yeah, well, I think my voice is loud enough, right?
Any questions from the room?
Thank you.
I was wondering if you also consider other technologies like artificial intelligence, for example.
Yeah, yes, we do. Of course, today we're talking about blockchain, so that's what I showed. But artificial intelligence is, of course, a way to get some of these sub-problems solved. So no, I don't have an artificial intelligence company within the blockchain, or within the rideshare consortium yet. But if there are solutions being provided by some of those initiatives that we're discussing, and they have to do with artificial intelligence, then sure, we're going to try and integrate that. And so the door is open to be able to, currently we're not concentrating on artificial intelligence yet. We haven't needed it today. The challenges are big enough as they are. So, but are you offering? Well, we should talk. Anybody else?
Yes, I was wondering how you went about opening up such a conservative industry to blockchain technology.
Well, we didn't. The thing is, my previous employer was Buma the Copyright Society. I was responsible for new business development there. And we tried to convince, I as a person, but the people working with me, tried to convince not only them, but a lot of people in the industry, like, this is a new way forward. And it's the most scary part is, of course, the message is your role is going to change. Because instead of you being the one who receives all the money, that's going to go automatically through the system directly, you're going to be, for instance, the validator. Well, this is a scary message because their business model relies, of course, on being the one in control. And that's what is one of the biggest business models in the music industry, being in control, being the intermediate who is in control. So letting go of control is obviously hard. And this is why we, for instance, partnered with Hardwell, is that it becomes relevant even though you don't want to work with it. If there's enough artists who are working with it, you're going to have to work with it. So I don't have the idea that I'm going to convince the whole industry. If we just convince enough influencers, the ball is going to be rolling, and then it's going to be rolling downhill. And then all of a sudden, these bigger labels who are now maybe just looking at it from a distance or just considering it or discussing it or whatever, they're going to have to move.
I think that your business model makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
The world is chaotic, it needs to be organized for data. I guess my main question is, what is the advantage that you have by using blockchain versus if rideshare owned, your own, if it was your private data?
Yeah.
And then presumably everyone that wants access to it needs to pay to have access to the data anyways. And I mean, having it as a blockchain has other technical problems. Like it has to be distributed.
Yeah.
So like who's going to host all the nodes? Whereas if you own all that yourself, it seems like, I guess my question is, what's the advantage of using blockchain in this case?
The biggest advantage that I saw once the coin fell in my mind, the digital coin, fell in my mind, was the fact that what I also said, it's the decentralization of trust. Because what I just answered the question before, control is a big part of the business right now. So nobody trusts each other to relinquish control. So if I would create a model like that, I would just be a new part of control. And there's been several incarnations, and I've skipped over that pretty quickly, but this has been tried and tested before. For instance, one of the biggest initiatives you can look up on the web regarding the music industry was called the Global Repertoire Database. So they tried to create just what you say. And from a technical perspective and from a logical perspective, you're absolutely right. Why should I use blockchain? I'm making a hard case for a technology which is not really needed if everybody's sensible. But like I said, there's a big political part in it where everybody's business is to not trust each other. And that, because you decentralize trust and make it a centralized database, a decentralized database with a central communicator, aka the blockchain in a track, then all of a sudden you don't have to trust your neighbor and you can try and maintain your business model. So it's more of a Trojan horse, so to say, than that in the long end, for a lot of these things, maybe we don't need a blockchain anymore. That would be great.
So I guess my follow-up question is, have you tried to pitch Taylor Swift on this yet?
No, I haven't talked to Taylor Swift yet. We're working with a lot of people within our scope, and as you can imagine, solving some of these issues is hard enough as it is. And trying to convince the whole world directly. I don't have the capabilities today, but we're working also, we are also looking into ICOs. We're looking to them.
Mobile number then? Do you have access to a mobile number? Can you give her a call?
I think we have access. I think we do have access to Taylor Swift if we want to, but one of the things that I think is sensible, what I do now. Yeah, Hartwell knows her. I mean, Robert has her number if he wants to. But one of the most, Robert is Hartwell, like I said. One of the sensible things that I think that we're doing today is saying more no than trying to get everybody persuaded today. I would first want to fix the model and make sure that it really works on a good scale. And then, of course, we're going to call her. So.
Final question?
Is there more than just Hartwell?
Yeah, there is. We're working with labels now, which are putting their complete portfolio in. So there's going to be coming out more. But we've dug underground a little bit to be able to really be able to claim what we say to be true. So we're working on the kinks and the cables and everything. So it's going to be a little while. I hope a little around maybe April, May next year that we're really going to shout about it, come out saying like with bells and whistles, we got some of the issues solved and now we can really scale, call Taylor, and get stuff going. So.
Andy, thanks a lot for sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's take a 5-minute break, get something to drink, go to the restroom, and please take your glasses with you. See you back in 5.
Oké, deze was grappig.
Ja, dat is helemaal...
Ik weet niet waarom die bij mij zo...